Hello everyone and welcome. This is a special extra video that I put together that is more of a condensed version of the glass painting basics video that I put out last Wednesday. I'm going to pack the most important information and tips into this video, but if you have questions or want more details, you should watch the longer version too, because it's more detailed, but I can also help to answer questions down in the comments below as well. I'm going to go over the most common types of paint to use on glass, give a few different examples of how you can transfer or create guidelines for a design on the glass, and how you can clean your designs off depending on what type of paint you used. So let's get started. Okay, for the paint, as in the paint you can buy that comes in a tube or a bottle of some sort, like liquid paint, the two most widely used and easy to find types are tempera and acrylic. Tempera is more temporary, and acrylic, once it dries, is going to be more durable and harder to clean off. There are other types of these paints that can be used as well. I don't typically use them, at least not in the liquid paint form that you spread with a paintbrush, and I didn't have any of those other types on hand anyway to add to my little experiment, so I'm not going to be talking about those in my video. But tempera and acrylic were used in my experiment. So next, for the paint markers, there are a few different types. There are chalk markers, which aren't technically paint, but I included them anyway. The most common reliable brands are VersaChalk and Bistro by Marvi Uchida. Then there are water-based paint markers, and two of the common reliable brands are Uniposca and Sharpie. So Sharpie's water-based variety has the blue band on it. Then there are alcohol-based paint markers too. A common reliable brand for that is Molotov, and they have two varieties of alcohol marker, liquid chrome, which I used for my experiment, and they also have permanent paint markers, they call them. And those are both alcohol-based, but I didn't have any of those on hand for my experiment. And then the last type I used was oil-based paint markers, and I have two different brands that I used in my experiment. Rust-Oleum Imagine Chrome and Sharpie oil-based paint markers, which those have the pink band on them rather than the blue. Just a note, there are also acrylic paint markers, and the most commonly used brand for that is the Molotov again. They're called Molotov One for All markers. I didn't have any on hand, and I didn't order any in time. But since they are made of acrylic paint, they would most likely have similar results to the liquid acrylic paint that I used in my experiment. But I just wanted to let everyone know that they're an option. You can have acrylic paint in marker form. So for this experiment, I set up 3 different glass windows with samples of the paint types I just mentioned. Again, except for the acrylic paint markers. The first window had more of the temporary paints on them, so chalk marker, which is again not exactly paint, and tempera paint. The second window had 2 varieties of water-based paint markers, the Uniposca and Sharpie, water-based. And then the third window had all of the more durable paints on it, so both the alcohol-based paint pen, the Molotov Liquid Chrome, and oil-based paint pens, and for those I used the Rust-Oleum Imagine Chrome brand and the Sharpie oil-based with the pink band on it. And then I also used liquid acrylic paint on that window as well, so there are actually technically 4 different varieties on that window because there were 2 of the oil-based. So then for all of these windows, I let them dry overnight. It was about 16 to 18 hours in total, and then I tried different methods of cleaning all of the different paints off the windows. So here are the results. First, I tested with my finger to see if I could smudge or wipe away any of the paint. The chalk marker came off real easy with just my finger. The tempera paint also came off relatively easy, but not quite as easy as the chalk marker. The water-based paint markers all smudged a bit with my finger, but it took a lot of force. And I will say that since I used the 2 different sizes of the water-based Sharpie, the bigger one may have not had enough time to dry, so it did smudge a little easier than the smaller water-based Sharpie. The rest of the paints on the third window didn't budge with my finger at all. No smudging whatsoever. So then the next step up was I just used a dry cloth, which is a little more abrasive than my finger. And on all of the types of paint that my finger worked on, the dry cloth worked too, and worked a little better for all of them. It did take a little more force for the water-based markers to come off with the dry cloth. But with the more temporary, the tempera and the chalk markers both came off very easily with the cloth as well as with my finger. So about the same for both. And the dry cloth didn't really do anything to anything on the third window, the more durable paints. So even with a lot of force, nothing came off. So for the next step up, I added water to the cloth. Not surprisingly, the wet cloth easily takes both the chalk marker and the tempera paint away. Moving on to the water-based markers, the wet cloth cleaned up all of the varieties fairly easily. It took a little bit more elbow grease, but it was still relatively easy overall. On the third window, mostly the paint all stayed when I wiped with a wet cloth, even with a bunch of force. The Sharpie oil-based markers did start to come off a little bit. That could possibly be because they weren't quite dry enough, as with the Sharpie water-based paint markers, the bigger one, because that didn't seem like it was quite dry, so that might be why it kind of came off. But the other markers were completely dry, didn't come off at all with the water. So then it was time to bring out the big guns. I started with the isopropyl alcohol. At this point in the experiment on the first two windows, everything would work on them because they all came off with water. So anything after that would work on them as well. So I'm not going to really talk about that as much anymore. The alcohol-based markers came off pretty easily with the alcohol, which is not surprising because alcohol-based markers are alcohol soluble. So that's why that works on alcohol markers. The oil-based Sharpies came off the next easiest, but again, those might have been not quite dry enough. I'm not sure. But the Rust-Oleum brand oil-based markers did not budge as much with the alcohol. They did come off a little bit, and I had to use some force. But it didn't just take it away like it did with the alcohol markers. But it does work. You just have to scrub a little more. And the acrylic paint was similar with the alcohol to the Rust-Oleum brand oil-based markers. So just about the same, where you have to kind of really scrub and it'll take it off, but it didn't just melt it away like it did with the alcohol markers. So next I tried the acetone. So with all four varieties of paint on this third window, the acetone worked fairly good with a decent amount of scrubbing force. It was not quote-unquote easy, but it did work with force. So acetone is probably not the best option you have with all of these markers, because it's not going to work that great. You're going to have to really scrub, but it does work if that's all you have. I also tried a window cleaner. I didn't realize until I was making the video that the brand of window cleaner I was using was ammonia-free, which the ammonia is actually the part that is supposed to work on this paint, the oil-based paints. So it still worked a little bit, but probably would have been better with an ammonia-based window cleaner. I'd have to try that again some other time. I do use it when I clean my windows anyway, just afterwards, and it usually will take anything that's left off on the window anyway, so, but it's not the best choice. Like I said, you still have to scrub a lot, and which we're going to get to. So at this point, all I was doing was scrubbing with either a dry cloth or a cotton swab, something like that. But then I brought out the straight razor blades, which is pretty much the when all else fails, just scrape it off option. But it works better in conjunction with some sort of cleaner, or even sometimes with water, with the less durable paints. If you just scrape it dry, it'll take longer. It's not as easy. And just a warning, any scraping that you do will leave you with an aftermath of scraped paint that needs to be cleaned off, off the floor or the ground from the window. And this depends, because you're not always working with a window in these projects, but it's a little bit extra cleanup because you're scraping off paint instead of kind of melting it away, and then it's on the cloth, and then you have to wash the cloth, So it's more work that way. You're going to have to clean it up afterwards, all the scraping. But again, when all else fails, you can scrape. So even if you don't have a chemical to use on the windows, you're just going to have to scrape it off and then kind of use maybe a window cleaner afterwards, or water even, and just kind of rub it with a cloth again. You'll eventually get everything off. It's just, the chemicals can help break down the more durable paints. But if you're adverse to using stronger chemicals like that, you probably either want to stick with water-based paint or the more temporary paints, or you want to just scrape it off when you're done rather than using the chemicals. And again, you can do that. It just takes a little longer. It's kind of a pain. But all in all, glass is very durable, easy to clean no matter what you put onto it. It doesn't get ruined by chemicals or scratched by a straight blade, so it is very forgiving for mistakes. And it's more useful for something that's more temporary, not that you're going to necessarily keep. Either you can do that with the more permanent markers. You can do a permanent thing, like a permanent sign or whatever. You can leave it up and it won't get damaged as long as you don't try to spray alcohol on it, or, acetone or ammonia-based window cleaner or anything, or ammonia or anything like that. So even if you splash those with water, again, nothing's going to happen. It's not going to, wipe away with a cloth and water or anything like that. So those can be used for permanent artwork. But if you're only doing it for a short time, you can use the more temporary markers, or you can even use the more permanent ones. You just have to clean them off. It's a little harder. But you can do it with glass, is my point. Glass is very forgiving. Glass is also transparent, so you can see through it, which makes it easy to transfer a pre-made design by tracing directly through it. So stay tuned for a special tip on that a little later. But you can also post up guidelines or graph paper on the opposite side of where you intend to paint, so that you can use those guidelines to create a design that is level and well proportioned with the glass surface being painted on. So again, so you can get everything kind of centered where it's supposed to be. You can use guidelines like straight through the glass because it's clear. And just like with many other surface types, you can also create guidelines on the same side of the glass as your design with one or more temporary options, like a chalk marker, like I was using earlier with that's very temporary. You can wipe it away with your finger. Or I also like using the Stabilo All marking pencil in my projects, and that works on glass. And there are other pencils that are similar that can work on glass too. Regular chalk is probably not going to work, just so you know. You can also use tape to help mark out guidelines. Rather than writing exactly on the glass, you can use the tape, and then you can write on the tape instead. And then you don't have to erase it away, you can just take the tape off. Another thing you can do on glass is you can use this graphite paper that I picked up. It does show up. It's very faint, but it shows up. You can see it. It's not easy to see on the camera. It was easier to see in person. But you can trace your pre-made design with a piece of graphite paper between the glass and the paper you've already designed your design on. So again, you can use it to trace on the actual surface that you're doing rather than taping it up to the outside or the other side of the glass or the window. And tracing it through it, you can trace it right onto the surface and then just trace it again with whatever you're using, whatever paint marker or paint you're using. And then it'll come off easily, again, with your finger. I was using my finger to take it off, or you can use a dry cloth, like I said, or a wet cloth probably. But you don't need any chemicals or anything for that either. So finally, I have a few more tips about glass and paint. Number 1, when working with a double pane glass like most windows, you'll want to close one eye to reduce the amount that your design moves around while you're tracing it. This happens because when you have both of your eyes open, both eyes see a completely different perspective because they are located on different halves of your face. And your brain has to combine the two images that both of your eyes give into one image Otherwise, you would have kind of double vision going on with both of your eyes seeing different things. So as you focus your vision on an object and alternate closing each of your eyes, the object you're focusing on moves, because again, each eye sees the object a little differently. So to keep the final image in your brain straight and more accurate for tracing, you should close one of your eyes the whole time you're tracing something to keep the original design that you're tracing in the same spot. You should also try to stand in one spot to keep the image from moving as well. Because if you move, like where you're seeing the image, it kind of moves behind. So you want to stay in one spot and just try to trace everything from that spot, because otherwise things are going to move and you're not going to know exactly where you're supposed to trace it to make it, perfect or more perfect from the thing that you're tracing. If it's something that you want to be perfect, not that you're just going to kind of wildly trace it, you want to stay in one spot. Tip number 2 is try to use a big enough brush or marker to cover the entire stroke you want to make without having to go back over it and fill it in. This is for 2 reasons. It takes more time to fill it in with a smaller brush or tip, and it keeps the paint more consistent when you only use one stroke. But tip number 3 is kind of related. If you're using a paint marker and it's showing up a little splotchy as you use it, or you have gone over it a couple times because it wasn't big enough, you can use a paintbrush to kind of smooth it out while the paint is still wet, so it'll give it a cleaner appearance. And that is it for the condensed version of this video. I hope you found it helpful. Again, if you want to learn a little more detail, you'll want to watch the original video that I posted. It's a little longer, but there's a lot of good information in there and a lot of good explanation in there. And you'll actually see the experiment as it unfolds, not just trusting, me reporting my results. So see them for yourself. But anyway, thank you for watching. We'll be back to the regular weekly Wednesday schedule again starting on the 18th. All right, everyone. That is going to do it for this week's video. Stay tuned until the very end. I've got some bonus footage and sneak peeks for you. But first, I want to thank you, yes you, for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you found it to be helpful, use those buttons. If you want to see more, you can follow Shrush Design on social media. The links are all in the description. And if you would like to browse my online shops, I have 2 Etsy shops and a Fiverr account, also listed below. If you are local to southeastern Wisconsin, I have even more services available, so you'll want to check out my website for that information. But wait, there's more! If you happen to be planning a wedding in the near future, I have another YouTube channel called Shrush Design Weddings, through which I discuss all of the choices you'll have while planning your wedding. And I also have another channel called Poised Pencraft, through which I teach the art of lettering, calligraphy, and some graphic design skills if you want to learn how to create your own designs from scratch and make each project truly your own. Links for both of those channels are, you guessed it, in the description. So if you're all subscribed now and ready for next week's video, I'll see you then. For now though, I'll leave you with the bonus footage and sneak peeks. Enjoy! So I have a few outtakes I had while filming for the bonus footage in this video. If you go back and watch the longer video, I do have some assistant Chaz in there, if you're missing him, because he's not in this video. If you seal it with something, you might be able to get away with it. Anyway, that's beyond this video. We're not going to talk about that much, but I'm going to unplug you. I'm going to unplug you. Problem solved. Just remind me to put that back in. So, where was I? Before I rambled off here. Talking about windows. Oh, you'd still be able to see through it because it's translucent then. Like it's kind of transparent, but it's not quite. There's a weirdo on his bike. Okay, he's gone. So, alcohol-based marker with this one. So, we're going to write alcohol based. So it's going to be ALCHOL, right? Maybe I should look it up. Hard for me to do that in my head. ALCOHOL is 7. Well, sort of, but no, I'm not going to use it. All right, scratch that. Let me just do it right here. So I just grabbed real quick the water-based white marker, whatever it is. Start with the temporary window. Actually, we're going to kind of go through all of them in different methods. So I'm going to take first a dry cloth and kind of wipe off. I might have to unplug that again. And for sneak peeks, on the 18th of January, I'll be doing another basics video. This time I'm explaining the basics of the Procreate app and demonstrating the ways that I use it for my projects. For anyone who is unfamiliar or at the very beginner level, this would be a good video. Then on the 25th, I'm going to be redoing some of my DIY projects for my wedding that happened 4 years ago. And while planning these projects and this video out, I realized I probably have enough for 2 videos dedicated to that, so there will be a part 2 on February 1st. And then on the 8th of February, I'm going to be starting my layout basics series as well. So we're going to start with all the basics here. There will be plenty more where that came from in the future, so if that's what you're looking to learn, you're in the right place. So I will see you in a few more days now with the basics of Procreate video. Bye.